Welcome everybody as you are logging in. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My camera is not working. I'm not sure why. I tested it just yesterday, but if you can hear me, if you could type a little hi into the chat box or something, just so I can make sure that the sound is good, that'd be great. Perfect, thank you. We'll wait a few more minutes before we get started to get a few more people in. There is a link in the chat box to some presentation slides if you want to take notes or anything. So, quick question, you are all on mute, so no worries if there's any background noises at your homes or where you're joining us from. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this evening to learn a little bit something about winter sowing. My name is Sam Burbach. I am the Education and Programming Coordinator at Clem Arboretum and Botanic Garden. And I've been here for just about almost 2 years now. And so you know, I've been wanting to try winter sowing for a long time, and this was kind of the perfect excuse to do that out at Clem. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about kind of what I've learned. We'll talk about the science behind it and how it works. We're going to talk about how you can try it at home. And then we are also I'm going to share a little bit of my experience with you as well. A little bit of Zoom housekeeping, I guess we'll say. The webinar is being recorded, so it will be posted to our website in the next few days once we get the recording of it. So if you have to cut out early or you miss anything, it will be on our website for you to check out at a later date. Everyone is on mute, so if there's any background noise at home, don't panic, it's all good. But that being said, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. So that way I can address that. I will kind of check it at a few points throughout, so I might not answer it immediately, but I will be checking it throughout a few stopping points just to address some questions. And then we'll, of course, have time for questions at the end of the presentation as well. And there's also some slide handout. There's a handout of the slides if you are interested in following along and taking notes. I've put the link in the chat box, so hopefully you can find it there. It's also linked on our website, and you can find it in the email, the reminder email that was sent out about an hour ago. There's a link for it at the bottom there. Otherwise, you don't have to print them or follow along there, but it is available if anybody is interested in that. And then without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. If my computer wants to work. Okay, so what is winter sowing? And in very, very simple terms, it's allowing the seeds to overwinter outdoors. So we're sowing seeds in the winter months in order to get a jump start in the spring. Sometimes you might sow seeds in fall. Oftentimes with perennials and natives, you'll sow them in the fall so that they could spend the winter outdoors. Sometimes with cold hardy veggies, I've heard of gardeners who will sprinkle spinach seeds on the snow as we're getting closer to spring. So that way, as the snow melts, the seeds nestle in and you get a really early crop. So winter sowing gives us a little bit of a jump in the spring, and so it's not necessarily something new, but it is new when we think about the winter sowing method, which we attribute to Trudy Davidoff, who started Winter Sown Educational. She began with this method in 2000 and started Winter Sown Educational. She registered it as a not-for-profit in 2003 to teach and promote this method, to help share seeds with schools, other educational organizations, and share information. And so through her efforts and her wonderful website, it has actually, the winter sowing method has actually been added to the National Agricultural Thesaurus and Glossary as a propagation method used throughout the winter, where temperate climate seeds are sown in protected vented containers and placed outdoors to foster a naturally timed high percentage germination of climate tolerant seedlings. So basically, we're adding a mini greenhouse to help the plants grow in the spring, is kind of the concept behind this. So you might have seen it before, you might have tried it before. Speaking of which, I have a poll here. Let's see if this works. To see if anybody has actually tried this before. So go ahead and participate in this poll if you can. Is it showing up? Looks like it. This is great. So it looks like a lot of people have not tried it yet that have pulled, but a few have, which is great. And it looks like perennials are favored here as far as what you've tried using this winter sowing method. when I was doing all of this last year, I was talking about it with my great aunt and my great uncle, who are avid gardeners, and they use this method for their perennials. And they were like, wait, you tried it with annuals? And I'm like, yeah, and it's working pretty well. So that is great. Thank you for participating. And I'm excited to share a little bit more with all of you. And so how exactly does this method work? And it really has everything to do with germination and helping the seeds break through dormancy. So after the seeds are produced on the plant, they're going to go through this period of dormancy, which prevents them from, germinating during winter, during unsuitable growing conditions, which in turn ensures the greatest chance of survival for these seeds. If a seed started growing in fall and then got hit by winter here, it wouldn't survive and be able to regerminate next spring. So it's really important for plants that grow in climates that have a cold period, that they go through this period of dormancy. If we're thinking of plants that are native to hot climates, the seeds can germinate year round. They don't have to worry about resting. So seeds that are native and grow in colder climates, or climates that have a cold period, there's this period of dormancy that protects the seeds from germinating. So that way, when the conditions are right for each individual seed to grow, it will be able to germinate. So these winter conditions really break down the seed coat. And that's kind of the winter period is what tells that seed, stay put and don't germinate yet. So it's not going to try to pop up at the last chance in fall and then be killed off by winter. So it's really an evolutional survival technique that these seeds have produced in order to have a way to know when they can germinate. So this cold period is what tells the seeds, don't germinate yet. And so if we were starting these seeds indoors, we would need to stratify the seeds before we sow them. And so stratification is this process of simulating the winter effects on seeds, whether it's a cold treatment or a moist and cold treatment. You'll often see these keywords on seed packets that say they are hardy, or they're a wildflower, or you can direct sow them before the last chance of frost, or that they're frost tolerant. And it will have germination requirements that ask for pre-chilling or refrigerate your seeds or freeze your seeds. So that way the seeds experience that cold, which then will tell them, okay, once it warms up after I felt the cold, I'm ready to germinate. I've made it through winter. And so we're trying to break dormancy, and we're trying to do it in an efficient manner with winter sowing, so that we don't have to stick our seeds in the refrigerator or freeze them for a month or 2 months in order to get the seeds to germinate. We're doing it outside in nature, but with a little assistance in this method. So what are advantages of winter sowing? The first is that it is low cost. We make these mini greenhouses out of recycled containers, oftentimes like a milk jug or a juice container. You can really use anything that's got a clear top, clear sides to grow it in. So it's a great way to recycle. So you're saving money by recycling. And you also don't need to purchase grow lights, which can be quite an expense. And then of course, running the grow lights. And seeds are also less expensive than transplants. Not to mention, you have such a huge variety of seeds to choose from, whereas you might not find as large of a variety in greenhouse grown plants. So low cost is always a good thing. It's also really, really easy. Setting up the mini greenhouses is easy. And then once you sow your seeds, you set it outside and you leave it alone until spring, until it warms up. So it's very hands-off. You don't have to frequently water them like you would if you were starting seeds indoors, and you don't have to adjust the grow lights and raise them up as the plants grow. During the winter months, very, very hands-off. And also save some space in your home, so you don't have to mess with cleaning up in your home. So that makes it very, very easy. This method is also going to produce strong plants that are already tolerant of the outdoor environment, because that's where they've been living. And your indoor grown or indoor started seedlings and transplants, or your greenhouse grown ones, they're used to being a little bit babied, whereas these ones have already been out in the element with a little bit of protection, but not nearly as much as the luxury of being grown in a greenhouse. So that does make for stronger plants. And it also gives you a nice task to do in the winter months. We've got quite a bit of snow outside, and so there's not much else we can be doing in the garden right now, but we can start sowing some seeds and just set them out there in the snow. And it's also going to free up a little bit of time in the spring for you, so you can take care of some other things. So it is a nice task to be doing, and we still have plenty of time to be starting. Are there any questions at this point? I know it's kind of early, but I will stop and see. Hello. Okay. Well, we'll move right along again. If you've got questions, don't know if this is a new one. How do we use this method? How do we winter sow our seeds? So the supplies you're going to need are pretty simple, pretty easy. Some seeds. We'll talk a little bit more about what type of seeds to try a little bit later. You'll want a clean, clear plastic container, a milk jug, a pop bottle, a juice bottle. Takeout containers that have the plastic kind of domed lids will work, but just realize there's not as much vertical space to grow upward once they actually germinate. But you can use that as a container as well, and clean them out before you start working with them. You can do like a bleach solution if you want to really, really clean them out. However, I usually use just really hot water and dish soap and really clean it that way. But do what you think will clean them best for you. You'll want some potting mix. You don't want to use a garden soil, but a nice light potting mix will work well. You'll need a little water, some scissors or a utility knife, whichever you're most comfortable with or have on hand. Optional is a nail or a drill. We'll talk about that. Some duct tape, and then something to mark your plants with, or your container with. Mark the plant on the container. And an oil-based paint marker is highly recommended. So step one, using your cleaned out container, you're going to get rid of the cap. You don't need that anymore for this project. So go ahead, clean it, get rid of the cap, and then you're going to want to poke some holes in the bottom for some drainage, and a few holes at the top, which will be ventilation once it does start warming up. You can use your utility knife to poke the holes if you want. it's a little easier to slip and not and make a little bit larger holes. So you could also use a nail or a drill with an old drill bit. If you are using like a juice container, I found that the plastic's a little bit thicker, and so I actually did have to use a drill to poke the holes in it, just because the plastic was thicker. So I find that the milk jugs are a little bit easier to work with than some of the thicker plastic containers, but use what you have on hand, or talk to neighbors. I've heard some people will contact like coffee shops and see if they have gallon milk containers to spare when they're ready to recycle them, if you're not a milk drinker. But any type of plastic that's not opaque will work. Then we're going to open up the greenhouse so that we can actually work in it and the plants have some space to grow. So you're going to want to cut around about 4 or 5 inches up from the bottom so that you have a nice area to put your potting soil in, kind of as you would with any other flat or container that you would start seeds in. So you want a little bit of depth there, and then it also allows plenty of space for the plants to grow upwards, and then leave a small hinge about 1 inch or 2, so that you can open and close the container, which will be important as we get closer to spring. If you cut all the way around it, it's no big deal, it'll still work, but having that hinge on there keeps it all together. I have found it is easier to poke the holes first and then cut it, but do what feels most comfortable for you and what's easiest. And please be careful. I do kind of freak my family out sometimes with the box cutter. So please be careful when you're cutting these open. Take your time, but it's really easy and quick to get that part set up. Just take your time. And then we're going to go ahead and fill them up with some potting mix. So you can pre-moisten your potting mix and then put it in, or you can put it in dry and then water it in. But as with any seed starting, we want to have a nice moist potting mix to start with. And then we're going to go ahead and sow our seeds. Just look at your package directions as far as how deep to put the seeds, cover them up, or if they need light, then don't cover them up. But just follow the directions on your seed packet. Here we're doing some tomatoes, so this is like in April, hence being outside to do this. This time of year, I will be doing this in my garage to stay out of the cold, but go ahead and sow your seeds. And then we're gonna wanna close up the greenhouse and label it. And so you can put a plant marker on the inside, like a stick on the inside with your plant, or you can write on the outside. Now, last year, which again was the first year I did this, I used just a regular old Sharpie, which was okay, but it did fade through the seasons, and so an oil-based paint marker is what I read will hold up to the weather a little bit better. On this photo here, the picture on the left is that oil-based paint marker. And you can see it's a lot darker. It looks thicker, more opaque, whereas the container on the right with the golden yellow pansy is just a regular old Sharpie. And being water-based, it's just not going to hold up quite as long. So we'll see. Obviously, I just did this year. We'll see how it holds up come spring, but they're relatively easy to find. Just make sure it's an oil-based paint marker and not like a water-based paint marker. And then duct tape it closed either all the way around or a couple hinges, strips up and down so you can easily hinge it come spring, but close it on up. And then we're going to just set it outside. Pick a sunny location that's not covered. You don't want a covered porch or awning over it. So that way the precipitation, be it snow, be it rain, can make its way into the container. And we're pretty much just going to leave them be until the weather warms up. This photo is of the tomatoes I started in April, hence the happy weeds popping up in my garden. Not the best example, but here we go. These were the seeds I had sown in February and set them outside. This is before we started working from home at Clem. And so I did a few by the building where there was no awning, so it wasn't covered, and a few away from the building. I didn't see too much difference in in my research. It said don't put it next to a building because it can get too hot. I had them there and they didn't seem to mind it, but I also did bring them home probably the end of April, because we did start working from home with the pandemic. So they didn't stay in that area. I can't attest to it how it would have done come true spring, but set them outside. I had sown these in early February, and a few days later we got the snow. You'll see it fall into the containers, settle around it, and there's just nothing to worry about. Just leave them be, and they will be just fine. I do see a question popped up here. So where's a good place to get seeds locally? So you can try our local garden centers, have decent selections of seeds, and you can try, you can even try like garden centers at big box stores. You'll see each store kind of carries their own brand of seeds, or their own, who they purchase their seeds from. And so you can get them either from a big box store in their garden center, or you can try the smaller garden centers. So that would be most all of them would carry seeds. You've got Didier's, I believe, would have seeds. Wayne's Feed, the Landscape Connection, I believe, carries seeds. I will have to look into a nice list that I can put together of where to buy seeds locally. I have also purchased seeds online just for the sake of getting variety. So maybe I'll put together a list of which garden centers actually carry nice seeds. And another question here is, how many seeds per container? It really depends on the type of seed. So if you're growing something that's going to get a little bit bigger, or that you're going to want to keep separate, like a tomato or something, you don't want two of them growing right next to each other. You're going to want to space them out. With my tomatoes in a gallon milk jug, I did about 7 to 8. I also planned for some of the seeds not to survive, so overseeding a little bit. With things like snapdragons, which we'll see in a little bit, I just sprinkled the seeds in there and let them grow. So I'll show you some pictures in just a little bit of the seeds, and it kind of depends on with the vegetables, where you want just a single stem with no competition, space them out. If it's a flower that you don't mind spreading, just kind of sprinkle the seeds in a little bit heavier. And then local co-ops will probably be able to help you find seeds grown locally. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. So let's talk about how we're going to care for our winter sown seeds for our little greenhouses. So very low maintenance. We're going to pretty much forget about them until the weather warms up. Maybe check on them, make sure they don't blow over in a windy storm or something in winter, but pretty much just leave them be until it warms up. Another thing you could do, if you don't want to worry about them blowing over, maybe use like a milk crate or a plastic tote. You'll want to make sure that there is some drainage holes in the bottom if you use like a solid plastic tote, because as it does warm up, we do want some drainage just like in our greenhouse. But I pretty much just left all the milk jugs huddled together, and there wasn't too much of an issue. None of them blew over or anything. So just kind of forget about them. Once the weather starts to warm up, that's when we're going to start keeping an eye on them. We're going to first be checking for moisture, and we'll want to look for condensation on the inside of the container. So you can see the water droplets here, beginning of April on this container. The condensation tells me that there's moisture in there, and I don't have to do anything with it. Again, I just get to leave it be. If it's completely dry and it's a warm day, it's above freezing, and it's completely dry on the inside, you'll want to go ahead and water it a little bit, either open it up and gently water it or kind of trickle some in, just so that way we get moisture in there. But besides that, until it gets closer to spring, pretty low maintenance. Once the seeds do germinate, again, we're going to keep checking for condensation. We do not want to let it dry out after the seedlings have germinated. And the air temperature within the milk jug or whichever container you use will be warmer. And so making sure there is adequate moisture and humidity in there will keep your seedlings quite happy. And also, because it's warmer in there, we want to make sure that they're not going to get overheated on very warm days. And this is talking later in spring. So open it up if it feels too hot in there and the air temperature is okay, and then close it up at night so that it again has that protection from the colder temperatures of spring. So these seedlings were the beginning of April, and I was making sure there was condensation on the inside. And in April, I wasn't really worrying about opening them up just yet. We'll look at that in a few more slides. I've got some pictures once they got a little fresh air. When we're still in spring, it's really important to watch for overnight freezes. A light frost usually won't do too much, especially if you're using seeds of like a hardy annual or a perennial. But if you are growing anything that's tender annual, heat-loving vegetables, if there is a hard freeze in the forecast, you're going to want to cover up those greenhouses or move them inside. A shed or a garage is fine. You just don't want it outside. And then the cold hardy plants will be okay in their greenhouse. So those snapdragons, totally fine. This photo here at the end of April is April 28th. And I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but there's a few little sad seedlings that had germinated earlier. And there was a hard freeze mid-April that I did not catch. I was watching, I would check the frost and freeze forecasts from the National Weather Service. I would check that every day. And there was one that was not predicted, and I lost them. But you can see some other seedlings did pop up. So all is well there. But kind of keep a track on that. I would check it every day. And again, just your tender annuals, your heat-loving veggies would have to be covered or brought in. Your cold hardy plants, you can just leave them be, they'll be fine. So here you're going to want to, as the temperatures warm up, give your plants some fresh air, open up the container. And this is where that hinge comes in handy, so you don't have the top half blowing away or getting lost. So that's why that hinge comes in handy. But you can open up your container on warm days, close them up at night again if it's still cooler evening temperatures, but giving them more fresh air as it gets warmer. is going to make for nice, strong plants. With your transplants that you either started indoors or that you purchased from a greenhouse, we have to harden them off before we plant them in the garden. Well, these plants are already outside. They're already growing outside, and they've been getting fresh air this whole time. So they're not hardened off in the same way that we would with our indoor plants, where we'd set them out for a few hours, bring them in. These, you leave them and you can open them up for fresh air and close them up. As you are opening your containers longer, just make sure you're also checking for moisture so that they don't dry out, because you're obviously not checking just for condensation on the lids anymore, and they are more likely to dry out quicker. So make sure you're checking for moisture, but give them some fresh air as it is warming up. And then you're going to transplant them into the garden just like anything else. So follow the guidelines for when's the appropriate time to transplant something, and that's when you will put it in the garden. This photo here is from the end of May, and there are my tomatoes. Some of the tomatoes I grew. They obviously do not look like the transplants that you would either start indoors with grow lights and fertilizer and all sorts of love and attention, or the ones you would purchase from a garden center that were grown in a greenhouse. They are kind of straggly looking and pretty small, but I did put them in the garden regardless. With leggy tomatoes or longer ones, bury them deeper so that way they can put out more roots off of that stem. Don't worry if the plants do seem a little bit smaller than your neighbors. They will catch up, and sometimes they even grow stronger. When I transplanted my tomatoes, it was either Memorial Day weekend or a weekend or two after that. I can't remember. But I meant to take a picture, and I thought I took a picture, but I could not find a picture of them transplanted into the garden. But it was honestly a little bit funny because they were tiny little tomato plants. But I will share photos with you at the end of this presentation so you can see how everything caught up. And they took off. They did just fine. So they may look small because they weren't given all that extra care and attention in the greenhouse, but they will catch up. So here's one photo from when I was transplanting some of my snapdragons, and here's an example of how I just broadcast the seeds. I didn't separate them out to be a single stem. You can see nice healthy roots here growing, and you can see lots of little plants there. What I basically did was broke it apart and planted little like clumps of them together and just spread them out in the garden, and eventually it did fill in quite nicely. I again thought I took a picture of once I transplanted them into the little garden bed that I had, and you can see the transplant date here was the end of May, which is late for snapdragons. They like the cold, but I didn't have a place to put them in the garden. But anyway, so I thought I took a picture, and when I was going through my phone to find the next pictures of once they were in the garden, I had about 10 pictures of my little Danny being a monkey. So got a little distracted and never finished taking pictures of transplanting. So I do apologize. I was really trying to document my whole winter sowing journey as best as I could, because I knew I wanted to do this program. There's Danny being a monkey. So I apologize. I can't show you what it looks like right when I put him in the ground, but that's kids for you, right? We'll talk a little bit about what to sow and when, and then I'll do some more questions, and then we'll take a look at more of stuff that went into to my garden. So early sowing, so that's January, February. What you might be sowing right now would be your perennials, your natives, hardy annuals, cold tolerant annuals, hardy veggies and herbs. Again, check those seed packets for terms like cold hardy or sow before the last frost. Perennials, like if you've ever grown milkweed before, you know it needs that stratification of either sitting in your fridge or freezer for a period or planting them out in the fall because it needs that cold temperature. So do your perennial seeds now, which from our poll, we learned a lot of people did start their perennials with this method. If you were to direct sow your perennials in spring, you're not as likely to get a flowers that very first season. With winter sowing, you're kind of getting a jump start, so you're a little bit more likely to get some flowering in that first season. Obviously not guaranteed, but because you have that extra period of warmth from the greenhouse, you're getting a little bit of extra time for the plant to develop and hopefully put on some flowers for you. So here's the stuff you can start now. And then our mid to late sowing period, March, April, potentially even May, if you want to just start something without actually direct sowing it. But these are your tender annuals, your tender veggies and herbs, your true heat lovers. You'll want to start a little bit later. With your peppers and tomatoes, really start those in April. I think my basil I started in April as well. Just to not expose it to too much heat because they are not to too much cold because they are not cold lovers. But please do note that if there is going to be a hard freeze in the forecast, you're going to want to cover up these greenhouses or again, move them into a garage or a shed just to protect them from the extreme cold. You might be thinking, I could just direct sow these. Why bother with the extra steps of the greenhouse? Excuse me. But by doing the winter sowing method with these things that you might normally just direct sow in the garden, instead of sowing them in the garden after the last frost, you're starting them a little bit earlier. In your greenhouse, the soil's warming up quicker than your garden soil, as well as the air temperature is warming up quicker, and it is getting protected from the cold temperatures, the frost, and even the hard freezes. So you're still getting a jump start with some of these tender annuals that you could just direct sow. You're just getting a little head start on it, and you're still not having to grow them indoors. You could, start your tomatoes indoors 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost, or you can start them in April and be a little bit more hands-off about it. So totally up to you, but it is still an advantage to start them a little bit earlier. And I have a link at the end of this presentation and also on the CLEM website that links you to Winter Sown Educational's website. And there's some fabulous lists that were put together of what seeds to try. And it's kind of broken down by natives, it's broken down by annuals, perennials, vegetables. And so I've linked the Winter Sown Educational seed lists at the end of this presentation. So this is a very quick, short list. Those are much more in-depth that you can look through to see if there's something that catches your eyes or something that you're like, ooh, could I try this? And you can check the sheet to see. And if this is your first time winter sowing, or even if it's not, maybe save back some seeds and don't winter sow your whole seed packet. So that way, if something does fail, you have some more to try with direct sowing, just in case. So I'm gonna go back to questions again here real quick. I really wish we were in person, but I'll go back to the question box. All right, so I've got a question here. Will my tomatoes grow as big if I winter sow in April as if I started now inside? No. So if you start your tomatoes inside, you will get larger plants, especially if you are using grow lights, or if you're using a diluted fertilizer along the line and that sort of thing. So your transplants will not be as big. However, your plants outside, once they've been transplanted, will catch up. So I will show you some pictures. My tomato pictures are at the end of the presentation. They started very small, but they caught up. They might have been a little bit further behind. So I hate to admit this, but my garden is on one side of the fence and my neighbor's garden's like just right there. And so they had done transplants from either something they started inside or bought at a garden center. And so when I planted my little winter sown tomatoes, they were very small in comparison. However, as I kind of peeked and saw how things grew throughout the summer, while they might have harvested their tomatoes a little earlier than mine, mine still kind of went a little gangbusters and got huge. So your tomato plants by the end of the growing season should get just as big as tomato plants that were purchased from a garden center or that you started inside. Hopefully that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, go ahead and type in a follow-up question to that. And then another question here. Is it better to do mail order or buy locally? And to tie in with that, are organic seeds worth the extra money? This is really up to personal preference and availability. It's always nice to buy locally to support our local businesses. It's always nice to support the local garden centers. If you can't find a type of seed that you want, doing the mail order seeds just gives you a really, really big variety. So it's really dependent on what you're looking for. And then the other thing is if you're doing like local seeds that are for natives, that's kind of helpful because you know that they're going to survive our area. But if you're buying tomato seeds, tomatoes aren't native to our area. So that part, it's really up to what you're looking for. If you can't find a variety that you really want to try, then look for mail order. If you go to a garden center and you're looking through their seeds and you don't care which variety of cherry tomato you get, you just know you want a cherry tomato, then go for it. But if you have a preference for organic or non-organic, that's really up to you. Either one should grow well. That's a little bit more of a personal preference type of choice. Hopefully that answers those questions. And again, if I didn't answer something, or if you were wondering something else, and I answered it in the wrong way, please just do a little follow-up question. I'm gonna check the chat box here too real quick. Okay, so co-ops can help you find locally grown seeds. Very true. Oh, native seeds. I will have to look into that. That's really neat. And then Do you have to cover the tender transplants after planted? So do you need to cover the transplants after they go in the garden? If you are planting them according to kind of your packet, like if it says plant after the last hard frost, it should be okay. The only time you would have to cover it is if there was like another hard frost in the forecast. But with tomatoes, you want to plant them after the last frost anyways. So that shouldn't be an issue. I know some gardeners in our area will say, oh, it's good to, I get my tomatoes in the ground Mother's Day, and then some gardeners say, oh, I wait till Memorial Day. If the sooner you plant something is when you need to watch harder for frosts and freezes. But if you're waiting until after that last frost, which is what's recommended for tender annuals and tender veggies, then there's not too much difference as far as watching them for overnight temperatures, because you've already passed that threshold. If we had some crazy frost in May, which I hope we wouldn't at the end of May, but if we had like a really, really late frost, then you would want to cover that, whether it was a store-bought transplant or a winter sown one. But our winter sown ones are already used to the outdoor temperatures. So my guess is they would be a little bit more tolerant and a little bit stronger than a greenhouse grown tender plant, if that makes sense. Okay, I see one more question popped up real quick. Okay, I am trying native perennials, hyssop and world milkweed. Are there any special concerns? I wouldn't, I'm not sure what type of concerns you're thinking of, but being native perennials, oftentimes, they drop their seed at the end of the season. Those seeds overwinter kind of in their place anyways. That's what they're meant to do. They're natives. And so those are great options for winter sowing in our area. And you can get those started now. I really need to get my milkweed seeds started soon, because they do require that cold period. And so getting those started now is a way to not have to worry about doing the pre-chilling that you would do if you were trying to sow them come spring. All right, so let's go on. I want to share some photos with you with how some of my winter sown seeds had done. I do want to disclaim this, small disclaimer here that it was my first time trying this. So I didn't really have much of a garden at this home I'm currently living in. We moved in 2019 at the end of summer. And so we built all new, we moved our whole vegetable garden. So that's brand new, so we could build a shed. And then I didn't have any flower beds in my backyard. And so all of those are built new. The method that I used for that was to just smother out the grass with cardboard, put the soil on top of it, and let it kind of do its thing and break down. So I did not plant many of my winter sown transplants as early as I should have or would have had I already had garden beds in. And so it does affect how quickly they grew once they were in the ground, because obviously they'd be happier in the ground at their appropriate transplant times. So sad little disclaimer there. And then as I had mentioned, some of the seeds were started out at Clem, and then we started working from home. And so they got a little neglected for a couple of weeks before I brought them back to my house. So not all of my seeds that I had done for winter sowing had made it. And I don't know if any of that's because of neglect or just bad seeds, because they were, some of them were older seed packets. It was a brand new experiment for me. So I was overwhelmingly happy with it. And I thought it worked well for what I wanted. But do note that some of this stuff is like, why is it not in the ground yet? And it's because I literally didn't have a garden to put it in. But let's look at some pictures. So here is some snapdragons. This is a bedding type, solstice purple. I had sown them at the beginning of February. You can see they got snowed on just 4 days after I had planted them. The middle photo is when I first noticed some germination, the beginning of April. And then at the end of April, you know, we're seeing more growth, more true leaves. You know, snapdragons are a cool season annual, so they like that cool temperature to germinate, and they can tolerate a light frost. So as the season went on, the two pictures, the left and the middle, that's the same container, just looking down into it and then opening it up. And you can see how they've grown. Now, like I said, they can tolerate a frost. So they definitely could have gone into the ground before April 15th, or excuse me, before May 15th when they're, so why are they still sitting in the container? Again, I simply didn't have a place to put them just yet. And then you can see that closer to the end of May, getting quite large. Ideally, they would have been transplanted earlier than that. But look at, let me go back one. Look at those baby snapdragons. Aren't they just so cute? I love baby plants. So it can tolerate the cold. I will be growing these again because I really liked them. And I do plan to transplant them earlier this time, but let's see how they turned out. I transplanted them at the end of May. And so here, again, I put them in little groupings instead of planting just the whole container all as one. So little groupings spread out every few inches. It's a bedding type, so it was going to fill in anyways. And it did quite a nice job. This particular variety like really did well and filled in a bigger area by the end of the season. It was still blooming in October. It was just a really pretty plant. So snapdragons, I think, were my easiest and favorite thing to winter sow as a beginner because it worked so well. It cooperated quite well, and it was a good thing to start on and feel accomplished. So I saved seeds from these. I also let it self-seed because they went a little crazy and there was a ton of seeds. So we'll see how they do next year, just coming up on their own. And I'm also going to try to winter sow some and then transplant them to see if an earlier transplant time will get them going a little bit faster. So I did some pansies. Again, they can tolerate some of the cold. They don't mind the cooler temperatures. And, you know, we use pansies in spring containers quite often. You can see by some of the dates here, just a tiny bit of germination at the beginning of April. And then we're looking at some nice green growth, but this is end of May. It would not have cut it for a spring container. So it still, it did well, it flowered beautifully. But here's one where if it was something you wanted to work into a spring container, it just wouldn't have made the cut like a greenhouse grown or indoor. If you wanted to start them indoors, would have just it didn't flower soon enough for that. And I love the little yellow one that got mixed in. Just so flowered beautifully, but if you're looking to start it for something really early, it's just not going to have that advantage as something grown indoors in a greenhouse with extra light. It relies on the natural conditions outside, and something isn't going to bloom as early as something that had that head start in the greenhouse when it comes to, you know, if you wanted an early annual for a container, but still beautiful. And I didn't necessarily need it any earlier, so I enjoyed them throughout the summer. Here is some hollyhock. These Queenie Purple was actually, a 2004 All-America Selections winner. It is a dwarf hollyhock, and it's got, you know, the double blooms, and it is known to bloom in its first year. So, you know, with a lot of hollyhocks being biennial, you're not going to get a flower that first year, but these ones did. Again, I didn't transplant them too early, but I had some really pretty blooms there in July, and the growth was pretty nice between the top and the bottom picture. It did, you can see, get quite a bit larger spending some time in the fresh air. Here are some Walla Walla onions that I started in February. You know, onions can take some cold, and so you can direct seed them, or you can start them indoors and transplant. You can transplant them, you know, 4 weeks, 6 weeks before the last frost date. So, you know, why bother with the greenhouse? Again, it's just a jump start. So when you're reading the seed packet, it's, you know, it says to transplant them when they're the thickness of a pencil. Well, I did not wait for them to get that big. In the greenhouse, they did not get as big as an indoor started onion. So little tidbit there. I transplanted them very tiny. But you can see here, by August, I had some nice size onions growing. I was completely happy with them. They were quite delicious, and again, loved by the family. So again, Danny he could not keep his hands off the darn onions, and he loved to pick those. So if you start them indoors, you're going to have larger transplants to put in the garden, but I thought that they caught up just fine, and they served their purpose of giving me some nice fresh onions. So tomatoes, here's the one that you know, you wouldn't necessarily think to do for winter sowing. And again, most of the tomatoes I had sown were beginning of April. I did start some earlier in March because I wanted to write up a little winter sowing guide for our online resources page at Clem. So I did it a little bit early just to accommodate that. Excuse me. And so that is probably the earliest I would want to do that. So started in late March, early April. These current photos are mid-May. So if you're thinking about your traditional tomatoes that you start indoors in April or late March even, they are much bigger than this by May. These were a little bit slower to grow, and this is a mixture of different varieties. So, you know, they put on a little bit of growth each week, but again, smaller than your tomatoes you'd buy from the nursery center or that you would grow indoors. And again, some gardeners will plant them as early as Mother's Day in our area. Some people will wait till Memorial Day or later, which was my kind of goal date to plant them anyways. So I wasn't too worried at this point, but again, a bit smaller than most people would be used to for tomato transplants. So here, end of May, a good amount of growth and, some nice true leaves. Again, long stems, so I buried them a little bit deeper when I planted them. And you can see there are quite a few growing in here, but I didn't sow as heavily as the Snapdragon, so I could easily separate them out from each other. And if I had sown fewer seeds, they'd probably have a little bit more room to grow without competition. But I planted quite a few just to try to ensure that I had a few, and they did quite well. And I did have to watch these for heavy freezes again. So make sure, especially in April, once they've germinated, if there's a freeze in the forecast, cover it or bring it inside. And I did transplant them out end of May, beginning of June. I can't remember, and I can't find a picture. But you can see here, this is the end of August. And here are some of my transplanted tomatoes. So on the left here is a variety called Jersey Devil. On the right at the top, that is a couple of tomatoes. Hillbilly is the variety. They're a yellow-red bicolor slicing tomato. And at the bottom is my mess of Amy's apricot. And also on the far left edge of that picture, let's see if I can get my cursor here. Like, this is where Hillbilly was growing over here. And this is where Amy's apricot was growing. And it just took over. My Florida weave did not work out so well. Farm and Fleet was out of the tall T-post. So I will be using a different method for tying them up next year. But this Amy's apricot produced so many little cherry tomatoes. It was kind of crazy. And so they caught up. While your neighbors might be harvesting a little bit earlier than you, I was not disappointed by the amount I harvested off of my plants by the end of the season. So I could have started seeds indoors, which wasn't going to happen because I didn't want to get grow lights or baby the plants. Or I could have bought transplants and not gotten any of these cool varieties, most likely, if I wanted a quicker harvest, if I wanted to worry about that. But I, one, didn't have a garden, and two, wasn't as concerned about that timing. So I was happy, minus the mess of poor staking, but I was happy with these tomatoes. They were still strong plants, even though they started out so small. And I'll also point out in these pictures, here I interplanted some basil. You can see it all the way up here, some basil in between my tomato plants. And I did, instead of, you can even see one down here, I planted a lot of it, way more than I needed. This variety is called Emerald Towers. It was amazing. It did not flower, and these plants were just humongous. I harvested so much off of them. So Emerald Towers, I would recommend it if you want a basil that's not going to flower soon. But I did winter sow these. Again, I did it kind of late. It was late April when I actually had sown them, just to see how they would do versus direct seeding them. I also direct seeded a few basil seeds in the garden just to kind of compare. And the ones I started in the greenhouse, in my mini greenhouses, actually the plants surpassed the direct seeded basil. So I thought of that as a winter sowing win as well. And then just to show you a little bit more of my tomato harvest. I mean, this is the end of summer, and half of it's filled with those little cherry tomatoes from Amy's apricot. And then these are some larger, they're, I believe they were a cross between a plum and a cherry. what was the variety called? I should have made a note of it. I think it was like brandy sweet wine or sweet plum or something. I'll have to look it up, but they were a little bit larger of a cherry. And this container is filled with almost 5.5 pounds of just those. And you can see some other tomatoes off to the side of the one picture. So I was not at all disappointed with my overall harvest, even though, you know, my neighbors were harvesting a little bit sooner than I was. I was very content with this. And my boys loved picking them, and they were eaten all throughout the summer. And just a quick plug here. If you do ever grow too much produce, you can always look into local food pantries to see about donating fresh produce if you ever produce more than you need, because they are always looking for some. You can check into local University of Illinois Extension, contact them to see if they are doing any collections or can point you in the right direction as well. So when you harvest more than you need, food pantries are always very grateful for some fresh produce as well. So some of the main resources, Winter Sown Educational is kind of the starting organization that you're going to get a lot of information from. Everyone's kind of pulled from that, and you can search for extension articles and everything, but a lot of the information comes from Winter Sown Educational. And again, a link to those seed lists, very long lists of different seeds to try with this method. So visit that site to see either your perennials, your natives, your annuals, your vegetables, to get some ideas there. And then I'm going to open back up questions. My contact information's here. So if you think of anything after this, if you want to ask questions throughout your experience doing this, if you want to share pictures or successes, feel free to email me. You can call our office, stop by once we open back up soon. But feel free to contact me. And for anybody who is signing off at this point, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me this evening. I would have loved to have done this in person, but Zoom it is for the current times. And I'm going to open back up the question box here to see what we have. All right, yes, my tomatoes did get crazy big. I'm going to definitely try some different staking techniques this year, because it was a hot mess. My Amy's apricot literally grew over the fence into my neighbor's. It was crazy, but they caught up very, very well. So where did I get my Amy apricot seeds and hillbilly seeds? Those are from Tomato Fest. So I think it's just Tomato Fest, either .com or .org. Just Google Tomato Fest seeds, and hopefully it'll take you to their website. Amy's apricot did crazy good, and my family loved them. And then hillbilly as a slicer was delicious. And let me say this too, I don't even like tomatoes really. I'll eat them out of the garden when they're like in salsa, or I'll make a few dishes with tomatoes, but those were Amy's apricot and hillbilly were both really good, coming from a non-tomato lover. So those ones were from Tomato Fest seeds. Let's see, any other questions here? Okay, so I can question here. I can throw cardboard on the grass and then add soil on that and plant stuff on top of that, and leave the cardboard to disintegrate to get rid of grass. So yes, and you know what? I might actually do a little online resource for our clem.org page on this, because it was something that I had done last year and just didn't have time to put something together. But basically what I did is laid down cardboard. You're going to want something that's non-glossy. If you can get it, something that doesn't have too much color, preferably, but take some cardboard boxes, lay them out to cover the grass, and then throw on a few inches of a nice garden soil. You can order it in, you can buy bags, you can, if you've got another place to dig it from, put that on top. Now, when I did this, it was beginning of May. I didn't plant in it right away. Water the cardboard down good before you put the soil on top, and then, continue to water that to try and break down the cardboard a little bit, so that the roots don't have too much trouble getting through that. The cardboard won't break down immediately. Some people wait a year before they plant in it. I didn't really want to wait. And so when transplanting those snapdragons, I put them into one of those beds that I created on top of the cardboard. And so I transplanted them kind of small. I didn't expect their roots to get too deep or anything. It was more just trying to fill in. You might still have some little pockets of turf that'll pop up through any cracks that you have in the cardboard, or some weeds. I did have some dandelions that made their presence, and a bit of thistle as well. So it's not totally foolproof, but it is relatively easy to just kind of transform a patch into a little bit of garden space. And I also did that in the garden. We basically took where the existing vegetable garden was and moved it down in the yard, so that we could accommodate a shed that would be on the north side of the garden instead of the south side. And so half of my garden was on top of turf, and then a small section was on top of existing garden. So when I planted those tomatoes, they were on the side with where the old turf was. So I had to really dig through that cardboard and break up the ground that was underneath the turf. And again, I didn't transplant right away because I wanted to give the cardboard a little bit of time to break down. So again, that's part of the reason I transplanted things late. But yeah, give it a shot. And I think I'm going to do a quick little write-up on that for our website. So keep an eye on our online resources, and I'll try to share some photos of how I did that last summer. That picking calendar, I think my dad bought it for me at Habitat for Humanity Restore. So I'm not sure exactly where to get that one from, but check out your garden centers and to find something similar to that. But thank you. It came in very handy. It was a good size for my boys to use, and they would load that thing up. So all right, I think my biggest problem is keeping the weeds out of the garden. What can I do? Well, you've got a couple of options, and it also somewhat depends on what type of garden, whether it is a vegetable garden or whether it is just a flower garden, and how comfortable you are with trying chemical control versus just mechanical control. Picking weeds does get kind of old, so trying some mulch is a good option to suppress that. You can also, if you're going to mulch it in and you don't want to use anything, any chemicals or anything, you can lay down some newspaper underneath your mulch, and that'll create another little barrier. It'll break down in the rain eventually, but it just makes it a little harder for the weeds to poke through. You can, try a fabric or a plastic mulch or layer to try to keep the weeds down. And if that doesn't work, if pulling them doesn't work, you might want to try a chemical control. I do know some people aren't as comfortable with that. So that's kind of, again, a personal preference, whether you want to do quick, easy, get the results, or, kind of keep up with it through mechanical control. I'm going to open up the chat box one more time as well. See if there's any more questions. Oh, I see some outsidepride.com for seeds. That's a nice tip. I haven't used them before. Okay. Hi, Judy. I don't know if you're still on or not, but prairie seeds do really well with this method. So that would be great. Okay, I don't see any more questions. If any do come up, and I do know there's only a few people left, so thanks for hanging in there with me. Feel free to call, feel free to email. Let me know if you do have questions throughout the process. But again, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope this gets you in the mood for a little bit of gardening, even with what seems like 5 feet of snow outside. But yes, something you can do this time of year. So yes, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great evening, and hope to see you out at Clem sometime. Take care. Bye-bye.